So I'm delighted to welcome Simon Torrance to another edition of the Business of AI podcast. So Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you, Tim.
Great to meet you too. And it's great to have you on board at UK AI. I'm really keen to learn more about your business and get into some of the questions, but could we start off by finding out more about you and your background and what led you to doing what you're doing now today?
Yeah, so I've been working in the tech sector for about 30 years now, and my focus has been really about helping traditional companies leverage technology to transform their business models. And I've been through all kinds of waves of technology development over time. And a few years ago, I was asked by a group of insurance companies actually to run a think tank on the impact of AI on that industry. And we ran it for about 3 to 4 months, and I just got fascinated by AI. This is a couple of years ago. And I decided to create a new company focused on trying to help traditional companies really take advantage of the most advanced forms of AI. So I set that up just over 18 months ago. It's called AI Risk. And I'll tell you more about it during the course of this discussion, no doubt.
Great. No, I'm looking forward to hearing about that. I think the name Risk maybe gives a clue as to some of the challenges that business face there. So in terms of when you started the business, where were you thinking that you would focus? Because you talked about helping those traditional businesses address some of those changes, and you also talk about sort of transformation. Is it that the traditional business now they're catching up with the need to go through that transformation, or are you dealing with a different part of the market?
Well, yeah, so the company's called AI Risk, and I was looking originally at the risks to companies of adopting AI. And the risks, originally for the insurance industry, what are the risks that the insurance industry might have to underwrite, but also the opportunities, for adopting AI. And of course, the risk can be broken down into there's technical risks, there's compliance risks, there's operational risks related to not having the right people with the right skills, and there's financial risk in terms of making bad investments. But I came to the conclusion that the biggest risk to companies today is not adopting agentic AI quick enough. So agentic AI is the most advanced form of AI. And if you think about it as not a tool, but actually as creating new digital workforces that potentially can scale at near zero marginal cost, then if your closest rival has a workforce in a few years' time 3 times the size of you, but they're not humans, they're AI agents, that creates an enormous competitive advantage. And so what's the risk to you if you have not made that transition? So that is what I focus 100% on now, helping companies to understand what agentic AI is, to create strategies such that they can create competitive advantage for themselves and de-risk being left behind by others that do it quicker and better than they do.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's the challenge, I think, for a lot of these businesses, that they realize that other people are using some type of AI tool and their competitors are using some sort of AI tool. And they're thinking, how can we catch up? What can we do? And what we've seen across many industry sectors is people rush into that and they don't really think it through. They use AI for AI's sake, and they kind of plug things together, and then it all ends quite badly. And then they come back and say, "Oh, well, we haven't got the ROI, it hasn't worked," blah blah blah, and they go through that sort of trough of disappointment. You're nodding along. It sounds like that's kind of a familiar story to you as well.
Exactly. That's what everybody's sort of, because it's obviously a huge buzzword at the moment. So, as you say, most companies I deal with, they've rushed off and they've put in place various tools, co-pilots, or given people access to ChatGPT. That's a pretty simple thing to do, but everybody can do that. It's like giving someone a laptop, giving your workforce a laptop to work with. There's no competitive advantage in that per se, unless your competitors are not using ChatGPT. But where it really gets interesting is if you think about the AI maturity, I call it the AI maturity model. at one level, you've got in the past, let's call it robotic process automation, which is sort of I'd call that pre-Gen AI, where you're automating processes, but it's very rigid. Then where we are now, we are giving, some companies are not even there yet, but we're giving people the tool of generative AI to help them with their personal productivity. And you and I probably use it every day quite a lot in what we do. But again, as I said, that's table stakes. Everybody will have that tool. When I talk about agentic AI, there's different gradations of that, but collectively, that's about creating a new workforce, because AI agents, as their name implies, they have autonomy, they have agency to undertake tasks end to end, and they are increasingly capable of doing the tasks that in the past only humans could do. So if you accept that, and I demonstrate this to clients, then you have this potential, as I said, to create a potentially infinite workforce made out of AI workers, not just human workers. And that is this is an unprecedented change. No, it's never happened before. You can make some analogies to perhaps, the outsourcing in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, where you outsource labor to cheaper places like India. Here, essentially, you're insourcing labor, very cheap labor, but to do not just basic work, but more and more complex work. And that's and all the companies I speak to have not even thought about it in this way at all. They're still thinking about tools and productivity and efficiency. They're not thinking about what happens when you have an infinite workforce to plug onto your human workforce. What does that do to what could you do for create new business models, change the economics of your firm? And so I'm helping companies just to understand that. That's the first point, and then to make the move into that space. Because as you say, there's lots of, if you like, playing around with basic AI tools today, and it's not really making a difference to the bottom line fundamentally yet.
So how do you start that process? How do you engage with the companies and sort of take them on a bit of a journey or a sort of a roadmap? I think you've got a sort of blueprint that you use sometimes, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've been using it with our clients for the last year and a half, and then we're just publishing a paper to make it available to everybody. So it's a blueprint for helping companies make that transition from, if you like, productivity tools, basic Gen AI, to having a workforce made up of AI agents that work and collaborate with your human workforce. So the way that we typically help companies is to, firstly, demonstrate what is even possible. Because when I show them some of the deployments we've done, where you have teams of agents running operational departments without any humans involved, or very barely any humans, and show them that this has been running for over a year now and it works, and we've worked through lots of the problems of that, and they are much better than the humans. They don't go to sleep, they don't take breaks, they work 24/7, and they respond to customers really fast and effectively. And working out the wrinkles of making them effective and collaborate together, brainstorming solutions for customers. When you show leaders that is even possible, then their eyes light up and they get excited it's possible. But until you do that, they don't know what they don't know. So the starting point is always to show people what is possible today, and how this future is not evenly distributed, as they say. There are pockets of these innovation, but it's not pervasive yet. So people really don't know what is possible today. So we start with that. So that's the first thing.
So I love that Gibson quote that you mentioned. The future's here, it's just not equally distributed. I mean, and that's absolutely right. And so it has so much sort of resonance. But talking about case studies, I'd love it if you could share some case studies. It sounds like that, that you were talking about that light bulb moment when you kind of show people how Agentic works, and people actually then get it. Could you share, help us kind of understand that?
Yeah, exactly. I'll share the best one, which really does show the future, and it's been running for, as I said, nearly 2 years now. But this was a company. Well, it is a company. It's a publicly listed company that wanted to create a new business line. In this case, it was an insurance business line that complemented its core business. And they didn't know anything about insurance, but they saw a gap in the market to offer to, it's called an affinity product, where the insurance has an affinity with the core business, and potentially very attractive. They'd done all their market research, they wanted to launch it, but they found it very difficult to hire insurance people to work for them, because they weren't an insurance company. They didn't really want to pay the best rates because they weren't quite sure how it might go. And they found that very difficult. So the CEO, who's a friend of my colleague who created this solution, which I'm going to describe, said to him, could we do this a different way? So my colleague said, well, maybe let's try and do it just with AI. So let's not hire any humans. Let's try and see if we could replicate an insurance operational team to manage all customer queries and manage all claims and manage everything else, and just do it with AI. Let's see if that's possible. This is nearly 2 years ago. So we created a team of AI agents, and they, since the beginning, and they still do, they collaborate on Slack like we might do, within our companies.
Yeah.
They each have an identity. They have a job description. They have access to data. To start with, there was no company data about insurance. So all the data was, from the internet through LLMs, and they were trained to do their task. And my colleague is an expert on what's called artificial life. So it's a slightly different strand of AI theory, if you like. And he'd done a PhD on this, way back in the I think 80s or 90s. And what it says is systems work better when they're made up of lots of small brains rather than one big brain trying to work everything out. So if we create these agents with very limited amount of knowledge and expertise, but if we let them interact and discuss things, then they learn very effectively, just like swarms of bees or flocks of birds, I should say. That's the one. Or like us humans, we all have our own size brain, but collectively we're very powerful. So he deliberately designed this, rather than creating some big system that would try and automate processes. He designed this team of agents. They each had their own very specific task, and they had a facilitator agent that would, whenever a customer problem came in, would then coordinate, bring the team together, give them the task of answering this problem. They all do it on Slack using a tool that is already available in the company. And that's important because it meant that the human workers could interact with them as well that way. And we created over, after trial and error, we created some mechanisms of creating quality thresholds so that their decision was never made until they'd reached a certain threshold. And then the team, once they've made the decision, it's actioned because it's integrated with the systems of the company. So it might be a customer is complaining about a payment for a claim that they've made. The team discuss it, they make a decision, they send a message back to the client saying, this is our decision, or we need more information from you, or whatever. And they do all of that, everything I've described, incredibly fast. They do it from their different perspectives. So you'll have a customer service agent who's representing the customer. You'll have a GDPR expert who might be thinking about issues relating to that, and you'll have a pricing or underwriting expert who'll be thinking about what the implications on their underwriting profit might be if they pay a claim or not. So what we found is that those agents work incredibly effectively. We managed to make them work incredibly effectively. As I said, they don't sleep or take breaks. So every time they're given a task, they just work on it until they get to the answer. And to start with, we always had a human in the loop that would check what they said what their decision at the end was, or their message, or their communication message to the customer proposed message would be. And over a year or so, we didn't need them because they were so good. And over the course of 18 months, they got incredible net promoter scores because they were responding so fast to customers. so like 25% higher than similar businesses. They were also tasked with increasing underwriting profit, reducing loss ratios in insurance terms. And they came up with some novel ways. I can explain this in a bit more detail if we wish, but they came up with some novel ways that humans had never thought of, because they're given that objective. They keep brainstorming until they get something, they test it. And to start with, it's slightly unethical or illegal, because their objective is purely, how do we reduce, increase profit? So you pull them back. We worked out mechanisms of making sure that they operate.
I was wondering where that was going, that story. But,
but they don't, they come up with this idea that is slightly unethical. We don't action it, of course. But then we say, well, okay, just bear in mind that these are the laws, number one, but secondly, these are our values. And you only need to put upload a document to them, or put a little picture saying here are our values, and they learn very fast. Anyway, just to finish the story very quickly, after 18 months, they've been incredibly successful. Higher net promoter scores, record underwriting profits. They actually complete tasks much quicker and better, to a higher quality when we benchmarked against the humans, and it saved the company millions in hiring human workers. So it's a really good example of what I've just described there is way ahead. It's like, that is super cutting edge. It's like what Google are doing in some of their labs as R&D experiments, but this is in a commercial environment.
Yeah, it's a great example, because you've gone from almost that initial concept of having a blank page and just an idea right through to the iteration. And you gave us all those stages of kind of like trial and error, right through to something which is actually up and running. If you were to sort of break it down, though, I mean, I'm sure you've got people in the audience now who are physically leaning in and thinking, well, I want to do that. How can I get started? What would your advice be to them? Because, on one hand, people are sort of thinking, well, that sounds complicated. But on the other hand, people will have heard of things like vibe coding, and people, I'm sure some of the entrepreneurs will be thinking, well, maybe I should just have a go at that myself and just fling some things together. But what would your advice be?
Yeah, so what I've just described is pretty sophisticated, but it works, and it's delivering real commercial value. So it's not theory or an R&D experiment anymore. And I just want to add one final bit before I get on to to answer your point, Tim. The other exciting thing about this case study is that we created digital twins of the human workers. Because to start with, you'd have human workers who would brainstorm or participate in discussions on Slack with the agents. But then they have to take lunch breaks, or they go home at night.
Pesky humans.
Yeah, pesky humans. And you know what it's like when you ask ChatGPT for something, it just churns out so much stuff. It's it's almost overwhelming. And the humans say, I just can't keep up with it. I would like to contribute, but I can't keep up with them. And what could I do? So what we did is we created digital twins of some of the human workers based on all their previous emails and Slack discussions. So it wasn't all of their expertise, but a certain part of their expertise that the agents needed their input on. So we created, they're called clones, digital twins of some of the humans, and they are now AI agents, and they participate with the agents at agent speed. And the human workers were delighted, because now I can get on with other more value-added jobs. I don't have to try and keep up with the agents, but my contribution is being made. And in fact, those workers who agreed to do that were paid extra money, because they were contributing more to the company. And that has what I've just described, if you pause a second, you think, like, that's got a lot of implications.
Yes.
Who owns that digital twin? If it's a twin of me and it's making value, it's creating value for the company, and I leave the company, do they retain it? Do I take it with me? Do I keep getting paid every time it's used once I've left the company, or retire? There's all kinds of very significant implications from this small case study that I've just described there. But it's working. It's not R&D. So coming back to and when I describe that to leaders, a lot of them say, the CEOs say, I want a digital twin. I want to sit in every meeting with a customer. I don't want to say anything, but I want to represent our values to the customer. So can you make a digital twin of me? And we say, yeah, well, we can, but coming back to your question, how do we get started here in a sensible way? And the worst thing to do is to try and, some sort of IT department experiment, because what I've just described is pretty fundamental to a business. And you need to plan it very carefully. You need to, once you understand what is possible, you need to create a proper strategy. So no company, what I've just described to you, 99.9% of people never heard what I've just said to you. So it is pretty mind-blowing and hard to get your head around. But if you accept that AI agents are capable of what I've just described, and even simpler things, supporting workflow, more simpler workflows, and so on, and the marginal cost for creating this is tiny, utterly tiny compared to hiring humans, and you can replicate them because they're software for very little cost, then you need a proper strategy for this. So the starting point is always, this is fundamental to the business model and the economics of the business. So it is the CEO's opportunity and issue. It's not an IT department thing. And so we need to sit down very carefully and say, well, what could we do if we had in 3 years' time, let's just say 4 times the operational capacity we have today? What could we do with that? And then you sort of work back from that and you say, well, where do we want to get started? Where is there a real pain point in our business where if we had agentic capability, we could dramatically streamline, cut costs, make much more efficient things that would have a material impact on our business in the short term? And then you can sort of plan a portfolio of activity that cuts across the rest of the business as well. So that's the process that we recommend, is that you start with a proper strategy, because it dramatically impacts the core strategy today, and you do it with the leadership team, and then you create a stage process for implementation based on the capabilities that you have today, and building those up as you go along.
How hard is that? Because going back to this a very simplistic example I gave, where a lot of companies, the CEO will say, just make AI happen. They don't really get into the detail. So how hard is it to get the CEO and the leadership team to understand the transformation, the mindset change which is needed in order to really sort of deliver that strategy you outlined? Because it doesn't sound like it's that all leadership teams, I wish they were, but I don't think all leadership teams would get that immediately. And there's a lot of impatience and, frankly, a lack of attention span. And I say that from somebody who sat in some of those boards.
Yeah, exactly. So it depends on the size of the company. So if you're dealing with a scale up, then it's fine, because the leaders are pretty digital, of course, and even in a company, say, of 100 or 300 people, they're pretty hands-on. And so if you have a visionary leader, you describe what I've just described. I get a lot of them who just say, yes, I want that tomorrow, let's make it happen. And we say, okay, we need to get in the room with you and your leadership team, and then you don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but this is really material to your business, so you need to spend a certain amount. We work it through, we create the plan, and off you go. So if you've got a company of that sort of size, I'd say 500 people or less, and you've got a visionary leader, then you do get their attention because they want to make it happen. Now, when you get into much larger corporations, then the leaders are managing complex businesses that have got a lot at stake in just with the core business model, and their attention span really depends on their personality to this topic. So are they a caretaker manager who's got 3 years left on their their contract, and then they're going to pass it over? They don't really care. They've got shorter term things that are going to remunerate them better. Or are they looking for the longer term, thinking 5-7 years out, and this is part of the strategy? So it slightly depends on the nature of the company and the individuals that you're dealing with. But what we have found, we work with, let's say, mid-size and smaller companies, digital scale-ups, I'd call them, and we work with divisions of huge companies. So a big telco I'm working with currently, it's a we start with a sponsor on the leadership team, and then we find a part of the business where we can get this going fast, and then we work with the business leaders there. Doing the same with a financial institution at the moment, where it's a very successful business unit within a huge conglomerate. So it depends on, so you ideally start at the top at either company, but you might be implementing within a business unit in a large company, or it'll be the whole company if it's a sort of mid-sized business.
And is that in order to identify a pilot project? So you'd work within a one team or one department, and then once you've got some traction, once you've got some data where you can actually point to the ROI, you can then look to scale that. And also, I wonder whether you could sort of talk a little bit about the time horizons here. What's a realistic time frame?
Yeah, so you can deliver, you can get some really good value in, depending on the company, but probably 6 months. You could really do something quite exciting in 6 months. We've got a target to automate all responses to customers from a call center using AI agents within the next 6 months. So 100% of emails from customers to be responded to within an hour. That's the target. For example, one client's set. And today it's something like 5% are responded to in an hour. So, that's real material value to give value, for customers in a call center situation. So you can deliver tangible value pretty quickly. What we tend to say is that you don't want to get stuck with doing random pilots. You do need strategy in place. And the pilots will be part of the strategy, but you will have a roadmap in place, rather than and that's been the problem with AI, as you have probably seen as well, is you have lots of random disparate pilots going on that never reach scale and collectively don't add up to anything. So I get a lot of CEOs who complain that I'm spending a lot of money on all of this, but it's not really touching the bottom line. And I say, well, that's because you haven't put in, A, you're not doing agentic AI, that's one thing, and B, you haven't put a proper strategy in place. And the strategy requires not just piloting or prototyping solutions in certain domains, which is really key for the learnings and getting real, if you like, specific ROI in certain areas. But you also need to be thinking about the change management for the organization. You're going to have different types of structures. You need reskilling. You'll need different metrics as well. So the operating model is going to be affected, and you need to have a plan to deal with that, not changing it straight away, but over time. And then, of course, on the IT side, you're going to need, most companies got all kinds of legacy gubbins that you need to sort of you need some sort of middleware between the customer interfaces or user interfaces and the legacy. And again, you need to be very careful. You need to know what sort of architectures to put in place and plan for that. But that doesn't need to hold you back either. Some people use that as an excuse. So there's a lot of things to coordinate, but without a proper strategy driven by the leadership, then you'll just get random experimentation that doesn't really deliver much.
Yeah. Just thinking about the risk as well. I mean, it's kind of in your name. I'm sure that comes up as a question from CEOs and the leadership teams you're speaking to, because I can see the enthusiasm of moving forward for this, but there's also a number of risks. So how do you address those risks, particularly with Agentic? And one of the things that I've heard more and more is that because Agentic is so new and accelerating at such speed, often there are vulnerabilities in there, and cybersecurity vulnerabilities that people haven't thought of. And there's almost this rush to stick things in without really thinking them through. So how do you approach risk generally?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So you need to, fundamentally, you need to understand how agentic AI works and what it does and where those vulnerabilities are. And then as part of the overall, let's call it enterprise architecture, not IT architecture, enterprise architecture, so that means processes connected to systems. You need to put in place a very careful, what we call it a controls layer. And the controls layer is whereby you can make sure that you are working within, compliant, you are complying to regulations, that you are secure against cyber attacks, that you've actually thought about it and done something about it, that you are not overstepping privacy issues, and that your systems are auditable. And the great thing about the case study I mentioned to you before is that all those interactions between the agents, it's all on Slack, so it's entirely auditable. You can tell the regulator how you came to that particular decision. You just show them all the logs of the discussions. So in many ways, you can be much more compliant than just relying on humans. But really, the answer to your question is you need to be cognizant of what those practical risks are, put in place the controls, and that means for the individual pilot or prototype projects, but also long term as well. So it's an issue, but it's not something that should hold you back. And again, we show more and more examples in case studies where people are working very effectively and with appropriate guardrails and controls, and there hasn't been, there are obviously issues as they go along, but they're not insurmountable.
Yeah, and there are quite robust and well used codes of conduct and standards which are out there. Cybersecurity is a great example. And we've done some workshops with the government on this. They're looking at updating their code of conducts around some principles-based checklists, effectively, where companies can go through and just ask the right questions, and then it's kind of agnostic to the actual technology, whether it's agentic or not, to make sure that they're thinking about the vulnerabilities and just checking that they've gone through that process.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something. It's very important, and you have to manage it. But it's not. It is manageable. There's no. I've never come across anybody who says we are not going to, once they know, once they've seen what's possible, and we create a strategy, they don't then stop because this is too dangerous. They never do that. They work out because it's so powerful and valuable. They work. We work out how to manage those risks.
Yeah. So we've talked about so much today. This has been great. It's fascinating to really see this through the lens of those senior leadership teams and then the actual implementation of some of these systems that you've been building. That's really, I think, quite unique, because often we kind of come at this looking at it from the actual technology itself. But I think you've given us that sort of that bigger picture view. Just as we start to wrap things up, I wanted to get your thoughts on, if a CEO or COO is listening to this, what's the one thing, that one concrete action that you think they should take to get going and position themselves for success?
Well, the first thing is to understand what is possible. So, as I said, no one knows that case study that I told you about, and it tends to blow their mind when they start thinking about what the implications of that, if they could apply something similar. So the first step is to educate yourself about what is even possible. That's the number one. And then I would always say, you've got to spend some time working out a proper strategy for exploiting this. I mean, people often say, well, the leaders should get their hands dirty and play around with tools. Yes, fine, but that's sort of less important than just understanding what's possible, understanding what your competitors could do if they move quicker than you do on this. And that's why a strategy is really important.
Yeah, I like that point about the competitors as well, because particularly in a scaling business, you're constantly thinking about what the competitors are doing, and they're trying to stay ahead of you. And so actually having that as a sort of a driver. And frankly, I mean, at a national level as well, I think the UK government needs to be considering more competitively what the other countries are doing.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why I'm really interested or keen to join the UK AI, because, I want the UK to be successful as well. And there's so much productivity that we could bring to our public services, which are creaking today, by applying agentic AI. So much there, as there is all the, the benefits to commercial organizations as well. So if we can help UK PLC to be a leader in agentic AI, then that'll help the economy no end, I think.
hugely. And actually, just another question, because whilst I've got you here, this morning I listened to Liz Kendall, the new Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, talk about the opportunities for AI in the UK, and she's determined that it benefits everybody in society. And it's not just limited to a small bubble. And I think it's absolutely right. That kind of resonates with Labour's values, but it also, more nationally, it's the right thing to do to ensure that we're going out to the regions and all age demographics, all communities, etc. One of the things that often gets leveled at the AI industry is the impact it's going to have on jobs.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about Agentic and these incredible workforces that you've outlined, which do sound incredibly efficient and cost effective. But how do we answer the question about what that's going to do to jobs in the future?
Exactly that, and that is, it's really critical, because what we will see is I would say, a decimation of white collar work. So a lot of white collar work is let's just say it can be automated away. Obviously, there's quite a lot that is special and different, but if it can be automated away, it will be, because we live in a capitalist society. So there is a real important imperative on government to fully understand the impact, particularly of agentic AI, on the country's workforce, and have a real proper understanding of what that input could be, and then work out what sort of new types of retraining or re-education are needed. Because just as we had the hollowing out of manufacturing through automation, and then most of our economy is now services anyway, and a lot of knowledge work, we're going to have the same in white collar work. So in the example, companies are driven by capitalist imperatives, and they will be driving efficiency, and agentic AI will just supercharge that. So the critical thing is to understand that impact and prepare for it, rather than wait until it's too late. And I fear, well, I know that government, just like business leaders, do not fully understand agentic AI and what it's capable of yet.
Yes. So I think the opportunity is to empower and augment humans rather than replacing them. And that's the sort of change that we need to be ensuring younger people coming up. I think they were talking about it as in terms of a pipeline, which sounds like a very sort of mechanistic way of thinking about it. But I think that's that idea of investing now in the young people, so that when they come into the workforce, they are able to have the skills to be those augmented humans, rather than expecting to rock up and get a white collar job, as you say.
Yeah, and somebody had this really great idea the other day. So when you go for a job, if you can't use a computer, as a knowledge worker, you're not going to get a job. So that's just basic thing. And if you say, well, I can use ChatGPT, that's just commodity as well. So when you talk about augmenting, the real interesting type of augmentation, if you were to say, when you went for a job, there's me, but with me come 10 AI agents that I've created.
Wow.
Now that would be interesting. That would be real augmentation.
Yeah.
So you get 10 of me for the price of one, or maybe price of 1.5. So I think that's the way of thinking about it. So we have to learn how to, young people have to learn how to not just use tools, but augment themselves with agents. And that would be a really amazing skill. And particularly if the UK, if we could train our workforce to be able to do that, then we'd be at a wonderful position.
There's so much more I'd love to ask about there, but we're going to have to kind of start to wrap things up. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It comes down to then, how do we market ourselves? How do we control all those rights, that knowledge that we've created in those digital twins? So much. It's a fascinating space. Have to have you back on the podcast again, Simon, or maybe even do a webinar to kind of delve into this in more depth. But just to wrap things up, how can we find out more about AI risk and keep in touch with you?
Yeah, so follow me on LinkedIn. So I publish a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I do a newsletter there for free. So just connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, AI Risk, it's ai-risk.co. And obviously they can find my details through UK AI as well and follow us there. But I publish a lot. It's a hugely passionate area for me, and I'm really looking forward to working with you to help bring this thinking to the UK to help us be successful in the future.
Fantastic. Simon, it's been great chatting to you. Looking forward to staying in touch and getting you involved in all these and seeing how all of your projects and clients' work develops. But thank you very much for joining us today on the Business of AI podcast.
Pleasure.